Back to Toronto, which sucks. This card has seen better days, as well as defenseman Mike Pelech.
Pelech knocked it down, falls on it. Also in the red was Mike Lampman. Sticks come up a little high. And there's high sticking penalties to Pelech and Wilkins. Double penalties, Pelech and Wilkins will get the gate.
Round 3, 17th overall pick in the 1964 amateur draft. Remember, there was only 6 teams back then. Played for Toronto from 67 all the way up to 74. Spent 2 years in the W with Vancouver and Cincinnati Stingers before going back to Toronto and playing another 54 games over 2 seasons. Didn't have a lot of, as a defenseman, 440 NHL games and 150 WHA games. But what can you do? Now we're going to another Hall of Famer, Montreal Canadiens center Henri Richard. There was only one card. I was surprised to see it in here. So it's not in the best shape, but he is a Hall of Famer, the Pocket Rocket.
Tremblay with the puck. Montreal coming out of their own zone. This is Ray-Jean Houle, number 14. Left wing to Henri Richard. Henri Richard is in. He scored. Here's a replay. As you see, Henri Richard working his way around Magnuson, coming out in front and flipping it past Esposito. Tony was moving one way, and he flipped the puck in the other direction. As the canny veteran, Richard makes it 3-2, Montreal in the lead. Now,
won 11 Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens, the most by any player. Tied for the most in any professional sport. Won a Bill Masterton in 74 when he came back at his age. 1,258 NHL games, 1,046 points. 180 playoff games, 129 points. Wasn't exactly a huge goal scorer, and he wasn't a big guy like his brother. He was only 5'7", weighed 160 pounds, soaking wet, with rocks in his pocket. So one of the true small men of the NHL. Now we're going back to Hollywood here. A guy who's been mentioned in several trades already. Left winger Ross Lonsberry, LA Kings. He was part of the trade that sent Eddie Oyel to Philadelphia for Andre Lacroix.
Go at it. John Ourry and Ross Lonsberry. Lonsberry holds on quickly, and Ourry still trying to get his hands loose. Lonsberry got an uppercut on him, and Ourry and Lonsberry going at it here. The linesman waiting for a chance to get in and separate them. You see when one player goes down.
Started his career with the Boston Bruins. Won 2 Stanley Cups with the Flyers and was traded to Pittsburgh, where he spent 3 seasons. He did pretty good in Pittsburgh. He was actually a pretty good player in Philly. So he's traded from Boston with Eddie Shack to LA for Ken Turlick, round 1 pick in 71, which was Ron Jones. I was like, who? And round 1 pick in 73 was Andre Savard, who wasn't bad. And then that trade from LA to Philly. Now we have our next Hall of Famer. New York Rangers right winger Rod Gilbert. Part of the GAG, the gag line, the goal of game line, with Vic Hatfield.
Trailing Rattel, a shot is wide. And a battle, Dallas Smith and Gilbert. And a headlock by Dallas on Gilbert. And Dallas going to work on him pretty good.
Dennis Hall tears in after it. And it's grabbed off by Gilbert right in front of the net. He passed instead of shooting. And Rattel couldn't get it. Now Gilbert again. Gilbert!
And Jean Rattel. Spent his entire career with the Rangers, over 1,000 games, 406 goals, 1,021 points, so almost a point a game. 79 playoff games, he had 67 points. He was a big part of the Rangers' early 70s success. They just couldn't beat Boston. They had Montreal's number in the 70s, though, a couple of times in the early 70s. Now we're going with a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame. And I thought he was, but this is Boston Bruins left winger Wayne Cashman. Spent his entire career with Boston, won 2 Stanley Cups. He was the guy who would go in the corners because he played on a line with Phil Esposito and Ken Hodge. 1,027 NHL games, so just over 1,000 games in the NHL, 277 goals, 793 assists. Was part of the 72 Summit Series until he cut his tongue. Then he needed stitches and he couldn't play against the Soviets in Moscow. 145 playoff games, he had 88 points. Over 1,000 penalty minutes as well, so he had more penalty minutes than actual games played. Coached a lot in the NHL as an assistant. Didn't win any major awards though. Now we're going back to the City of Champions. This guy should also be in the Hall of Fame, and probably would have been if he hadn't jumped to the WHA. That's defenseman Montreal Canadiens J.C. Tremblay. This card's in pretty good shape. The Cashman's in beautiful shape. J.C. won 5 Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens. Then in '72 he jumped to the WHA and played for the Quebec Nordiques for all 7 seasons. Was a huge all-star in that league. Played the Russians in the '74 Summit Series. And won an APCO trophy in '77.
There, tried to flip it in front. Here's Tremblay at the point, moving in. The shot! He scores! Tremblay! A high shot to put the Canadiens in front. 3-1 for the Nordiques. Up along the boards to Cloutier, to Tremblay. Long shot. Daly moves it to the score! Long shot! That's Joe Daly!
It's not exactly a goal scorer, but in 794 NHL games, he had 57 goals, 363 assists. In 450 WHA games, he had 66 goals, 424 points. And then in 108 NHL playoff games, he had 14 goals, 51 assists for 65 points. He was a big part of Montreal's defense and should probably be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Staying with Montreal, we have another defenseman. Montreal Canadiens defenseman Jacques Laperriere, whatever you pronounce it. He too won 5 Stanley Cups with Montreal. Retired the same year that Henri Richard did. 692 NHL games, 282 points, 88 playoff games, 31 points. Big stay-at-home defenseman. He scored only 40 goals in his entire career. Now we're going with our goalie. To where the Tea Party started, back in Boston, we got Ed Johnston. Won 2 Stanley Cups with the Boston Bruins. Also coached the Pittsburgh Penguins during the early 80s and the mid 90s. Never had any playoff success with them. As a goaltender, he wasn't great. He played over 592 games with Boston, Toronto, St. Louis, Chicago. 32 shutouts at a 3.25 goals against average. 237 wins, 256 losses for 78 ties. His time in Toronto was pretty forgettable, as well as his time in St. Louis. St. Louis was rebuilding at that time. March '73 traded on later date from Boston with round 1 pick in '74 draft to Toronto for Jacques Plante and round 3 pick in the '73 draft. So Toronto got Jacques Plante, who he played 8 games for. That's interesting. Did not know Jacques Plante played for Boston. Then he was traded from St. Louis to Chicago for future considerations. Doesn't say how he ended up in St. Louis. Now we're going back to the Midwest. St. Louis Blues left winger Jim Lorentz. I know him better when he played for Buffalo. Did not know he played for St. Louis.
Jocelyn gave from with number 8, Jimmy Lorentz out there. A pass over the line. Here's the shot. Jimmy Lorentz got the rebound. Jimmy Lorentz. Oh, what a goal that was. So down.
He actually won a Stanley Cup with the Boston Bruins in 1970. Then was sent to the St. Louis Blues, played for the New York Rangers, St. Louis, New York, and Buffalo all in the same year, 71-72. Traded from Boston Bruins to St. Louis Blues for round 1 pick in 1970, which was Ron Plum. Bad trade on Boston's part. 71 traded from St. Louis with Wayne Connolly and Gene Carr to New York Rangers for Jack Edgers, Andre DuPont, Mike Murphy, and player to be named later. Say St. Louis won that deal. And then finally traded from New York Rangers to Buffalo for some other player to be named later. Alright, last card we're going to get is Minnesota North Stars left winger Jean-Paul Parise. He was part of the '72 Summit Series as well, but didn't play very much.
20 seconds to go. Parisi ties it up. I don't really know, but pretty angry at the shot. Here's Parisi scoring. Parisi Gilbert breaking in close. A goal. Saying to himself, I don't really know, but pretty angry at the shot. Here's Parisi scoring. Parisi ties it up as Giacomin was 20 seconds to go. Gibbs. Loose puck, a shot, and a great save. Another shot from the side doesn't go. A loose puck in front, and no goal.
He played for the Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs, Minnesota North Stars for a lot of years, the Islanders, Cleveland Barons, and back to Minnesota. 890 NHL games, 238 goals, 594 points. 86 playoff games, he had 27 goals for 58 points. He was one of the big guys in Minnesota. Him and Jude Duran, Bill Goldsworthy, and Danny Grant. Minnesota should have been able to build a good team back then. So he's claimed an expansion draft by Oakland from Boston, but he never played for them. Because the same year in September he was traded from Oakland with Brian Hextall. We already mentioned this trade to the AHL for Jerry Amon. Bad trade. And he's traded from Rochester with Milan Marcetta and player to be named later to Minnesota North Stars for Murray Hall, Don Johns, Len Lund, Ted Taylor, and George Duke Harrison. So back then, you could AHL teams could trade with NHL teams. Interesting. Traded from the Minnesota North Stars, New York Islanders for Ernie Hick and Doug Rombo. Bad trade. Traded from New York Islanders for Jean Potvin to Cleveland Barons for Wayne Merrick and player to be named later. Islanders won that trade because Gene Potvin later went back to the Islanders, and Wayne Merrick was actually a pretty good player who won 4 Stanley Cups. So there we have it. 33 cards from the 1971 O-PEE-CHEE set. I only need 42 cards to complete this set. And of course, it's Dryden, Orr, Lafleur, Dion, Perron, Hall, Clark. All the big names I need. But eventually we'll get there. Any hockey card fans out there, let me know what you guys think of this series. And then, what do you think of the trades that I mentioned? Some pretty interesting trades there. Anyway, leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.